people there. This is great.
It's also really nice that the bunker is really close to the meadows, so you can kind of hit both at the same time.
Hello, hello. It is me, Legendary, and today we're gonna have a bit of a tough video to get through, but I think it's important. So I think it's about time I cleared the air about what exactly happened with WL, what actually happened behind the scenes a little bit, and just overall discuss the resulting decisions that I made to leave the regiment and move on to start a new regiment with some of the former officers called High Velocity Logistics, or HVL. This is a difficult topic to talk about. Obviously, there are a lot of ups and downs that are going to go through it. So my idea behind this video is, first and foremost, to not stir up any drama. It is there as a way for me to basically categorize and catalog exactly what happened with WL and just get the truth out there from my perspective. So there will be a bit of nuances with this video, but hopefully I can describe everything with absolute clarity so that there is no more confusion or speculation from the general Foxhole community. So if you were wondering what happened to WL and all the actions that took place before the ultimate decision of the regiment closing down had happened, this is the video to hopefully explain a few things. All right, so let's jump into it. First and foremost, this video is purely my personal anecdote. I was an officer within WL for a decent amount of time within the regiment. I was involved in a lot of higher management discussions regarding with the operation status of the regiment, as well as the outlook and the plans for the regiment in the future. So besides being Cronus himself, I pretty much had access to the very, very upper echelons of what and how the regiment functioned. That being said, everything that I'm going to be discussing within this video is my own personal information. If there were additional informations or additional discussions that happened behind even further closed doors or between person and person that I'm not aware of, I can't explain or talk about it because I was not directly involved. I can only I can only explain things from the information that I had at hand before the Discord got closed down. That being said, this is also not an official statement for WL if for some future event the regiment does come back. At this point in time, there's no immediate indication of it, but again, things can change over 6 months or a year, so there might be a resurgence of WL. So I'm basically just explaining my perspective at this point in time. So we'll see how it goes in future prospects. Additionally, this is not an official statement for HVL, the new regiment, or its former officers from WL. If you want to get your opinion for them about them with regards to the events that took place, your best bet is to just contact them. But that being said, I'm giving you a very close, if not perfect, accurate representation of the events that took place in a summarized format. There are some minor details that didn't immediately get into this video just because every nitty-gritty detail chronological event is difficult to catalog in a meaningful way. So yeah, if you're only interested in the official statement of HVL, again, please go and take a look at the official statement that we posted on Reddit. And there is also a Q&A that we posted within our official Discord where we basically addressed the sort of common questions that we got in regards to the entire creation of the regiment, as well as the sort of last moments of WL before the transition or the new regiment took place. So if you're interested in official only documentation, this is not the right place to find it. This is going to be my personal anecdote on the events that took place. All right, so I will link the official Reddit post about HVL in the description, and if you want to get the official Discord link, that will probably be posted as well. But of course, you can always reach out to us on Discord if you need an invite. We're on most common colonial-based Discords, as well as FOD, etc. Right. Before we get into it, I kind of also want to just highlight some of my history with WL. Get everyone watching this video to understand the sort of structure and the motivation and the playstyle of the regiment behind the actual events that took place, because that will infer a much greater understanding of the events that took place and the decisions that I ultimately ended up making. So, from my personal history, I started playing Foxhole in War 86. I was basically without a clan until War 88. After War 88, I made a small regiment between me and my friends. We were not serious at the game at all. We were very much just learning the game mechanically, and we didn't join any large regiments. It was just basically a group of IRL friends decided to play together using the in-game regiment function to, do things like squad locks and ultimately facility locks and things like that later on. So until Inferno, we were all over the place, but after Inferno, we started to settle down in a sort of usual pattern for how our small group kind of got to play. And this just happened to be in Penance in Red River. Now, the reason why we chose Penance in Red River was because it had water access to the refinery and the seaport, and generally speaking, Penance normally never got built up. It was sort of in this blind spot where all major regiments kind of just left that town alone. So we were able to consistently start building there every single war. We had access to a storage depot to store stuff easily. That the town gave a lot of AI coverage, so we could defend most of our stuff. At the moment, we started building bunker bases. So we consistently built up Penance and we played there. And this is where we frequently bumped into the Winter Legion logistics members, and notably we would also bump into Cronus from time to time. So after several wars of my little regiment called C22 building up Penance and playing in there and slowly getting to grips with how the game functioned properly and how the logistics systems function properly, Cronus eventually personally asked me to join WL, and alongside myself and a couple of people that were in C22 at the time, we accepted and we ultimately joined WL, starting during War 110, and that would then proceed to continue on without any additional changes in our regiment structure up until then. All right, so that's my original history with WL. I was basically poached by Cronus. He saw that we were consistently playing very well within Red River. We collaborated very well with WL. We always helped out during the WL last stand of Cannon Smoke whenever the Wardens tried to push in. We were always ready to fight. We were always willing to help out, and ultimately he thought that we would be a great fit for the regiment, so I decided to join. Since then, WL has been a great home for me. I'm not gonna lie. I was able to expand my ideas for the game and my concept for the game quite extensively. I met a lot of amazing people, and I was able to inspire a lot of interesting strategies that was incorporated into the main WL loop over time. So here I'm just going to do a few notable things that I personally achieved within the regiment. And again, this is why I had high hopes for the regiment to maintain itself for the coming futures. So notably in War 112, we organized and operated the first WL War Factory. This was the war where we spammed a lot of facility locked vehicles into public depots. We notably built up two war factories. One was in Greenfield Orchard in the Heartlands, and that's where we primarily built light tank variants and everything up into like the starting point for Falchion variants as well. And we produced a lot of tanks there, and we did daily public tank releases. It was more or less like 100 to 200 tanks on the daily that people would just have to show up to the Greenfield Orchard storage depot. They would grab a tank, grab a crew, grab a gas mask and filter that we supplied, and then they would go and fight on the front. We then later built a much larger, much more self-sustaining war factory in Brine Glen, and it's there where we really hit our peak as a regiment. That's where we brought in daily tank, like train loads of tanks, and we made all kinds of variants, from Quadishas to Scorpions that were vetted, to rocket tanks, to the massive influx of Spathas and Taluses, and all kinds of pushgun variants as well, like the Stygian and the Smelters. And ultimately, we were able to push out a lot of public vehicles that war, and it felt really, really good. So at this point, the WL War Factory became a quote-unquote pipe dream for the regiment itself. We always try and look to use the War Factory whenever possible, but that was essentially the initial steps for it was masterminded and fabricated by myself, as well as Eternal Dewas, who was one of my friends who came over from C22. So we organized and we planned it, and of course the entire regiment contributed together to make the War Factory a reality. So that was our first sort of big step into playing with WL. The next war, that was when the devs decided to nerf the amount of components that were being produced by fields. Notably, the broken component meta then massively got nerfed, and it became a lot more labor intensive to create processed construction materials and components. So that war, I put my thinking hat on, and I decided to play around with this idea of making processed construction materials using the recycler recipe that didn't involve any components. Now, again, before the war started and after the announcement of the component nerf, I kind of put on my thinking hat, opened some Excel spreadsheets, and I started to do some number crunching to see how we can effectively make processed construction materials, because I realized that processed construction materials can actually be used to produce battle tanks and ships without the need of components. And back at the time, I realized that these would be literal junk tanks, like tanks without any components. Like if you wanted to make a medium tank, like a Spatha or a light tank, you needed components to make refined materials to then take it to a mass production factory or garage. But BTs, battleships, etc., and trains specifically didn't rely on the use of components whatsoever. You could make them with pure salvage. It was during that time I built a very, very large very large facility in the spine, and that's where we sort of perfected the idea of constantly maintaining 3 recyclers to produce an infinite amount of processed construction materials. During that war, Cronus kind of like came to take a look at what we were up to, and he saw the amount of construction materials that we were making and the processes that we were using to make the construction materials, and he basically dubbed the term, "Oh, you guys are making meatless pecans or vegan pecans." And that's actually where the term came from. It was that war, we standardized it, and I shared my findings with the larger Foxhole community, and it kind of picked up from there. And nowadays, vegan PC mats and vegan pecans is pretty much used everywhere. But again, War 113 is where we sort of tested it out and did it in the mass production of this material. And again, we were only able to do this because of the involvement of the regiment, as well as the hard work that a lot of people did to make it reality. That was a very trying war for me personally as well. I burnt out a little bit halfway through the war, but we managed to pull it together and ultimately made the entire thing a success. All right, and between that war and essentially to War 122, the regiment has been growing, and we did a lot of operations. We managed a lot of facilities. I was able to lead many different types of teams to do various tasks, such as Coast Guard's duties, to running weird, wacky facilities to doing mini war factories, doing just upgrade pads, various types of achievements, and essentially I've been chronicling all our amazing gameplay on my YouTube channel through mostly my YouTube shorts, but also through the use of a couple of compilation videos that I did for certain wars. Notably, most BT ops and most SPG ops or artillery ops, I tended to catalog quite well until I really just dived into the YouTube short algorithm for a while. But yeah, overall, WL has been a massive positive for my Foxhole gameplay experience, and I'm not going to back down from that at all. It was an amazing time to play in the regiment, and my entire tenure as both just a regular member as well as a lieutenant and an officer within WL, we've managed to achieve a lot of great things. And again, my YouTube channel is a testament to good gameplay and good collaboration between various people within the regiment to achieve success. All right, moving forward. Let's talk about recent history. So currently in the last 3 wars, there were some hiccups to my personal gameplay within the regiment itself. Now, none of these really built up to the ultimate decision that I made to leaving the regiment, but it is worth noting just the timeline of things so that it can be reflected accurately once we do get to that point. So in War 122, I didn't play all that much near the start of the war and the mid-war because I was actually in hospital due to some skin-related problems. And for the most portion of that time, I was just keeping an eye on things on Discord through my phone and just actually watching Cronus' stream on Twitch while I was lying in the hospital bed, just keeping an eye on things and, you know, making some speedy recovery, I guess. When I did get back home and after several days of resting and taking it easy, I did decide to jump back on to Foxhole, and essentially I played for about a couple of days before the war actually ended because the devs announced that the actual war needed to end for, you know, scheduling purposes. Immediately after War 122, it was the imbalance pot war. So this was War 123, and just like the war before, we stuck to our usual WL guns. We built Red River, we built a couple of facility in Heartlands, but then we suddenly realized that the Wardens just had an overwhelming population advantage over the Colonials, and this was indeed just going to be a short war. Now, seeing as how I was quite absent from the war before, I took that war quite quote-unquote seriously. I wanted to make sure that our facilities in the Blemish wasn't going to get overrun within a couple of days. So I managed to grab as many people as I can from, you know, the various salvage fields and the facilities, and motivated everyone to, hey, we need to build up defenses and we need to hold out for as long as possible. And we decided to build a massive sort of tier 2 fortress in the north side of the Plough within the Heartlands. Well, we never really got to concrete it properly because we barely got to like concrete tech with the coal facilities until the war ended. The war was literally just that short. And ultimately we and my team at that point suffered a massive dip in our morale at the end of that war because there was one instance within that war where a large coordinated Warden partisan group decided to artillery the north side of the Heartlands using 4 unemplaced 120 guns on a road, and we actually prepped a counter artillery battery to fight them. But when the day came to jump on the guns and shoot them, my team legitimately could not load into the hex. We tried everything. We even tried like spawning in adjacent hex and driving trucks filled with low G supplies into the Blemish, but that it was simply just region locked. Something weird was going on, and essentially we couldn't QRF onto our guns that was fully prepped, fully stocked, ready to go inside the base. It's just like I legitimately myself couldn't fire an artillery gun alone because I needed people to help move it, etc. So we were really burned out by that, and my team just basically said that this was complete bullshit. We couldn't defend the push into Greenfield Orchid. Something was wrong with the server. Something was missing, and literally only 20, I think it was like 27 colonials were able to load into the hex and fight, and most of them weren't on the front. So it felt really bad. We were really, really burned out at the end of War 123, so we decided to take a vacation war in War 124, where we had an amazing time. We were able to do some unlarping, got to experience the Warden culture. I got to join works and figure out how the work system works, and just, field claims and all that good stuff. And we had a really nice time in War 124. And that's why we did a sort of partial group of people playing Warden and the majority of WL stayed green. Essentially, the team that defended the north side of the Heartlands, they went Warden because everyone was burnt out. A lot of people asked that they take a break from our usual gameplay loop so that we can have a little bit of fun. And that's the recent history that we had with WL. So this now leads to the question of what happened during this short time span. Essentially what happened in War 123, 122, 124 that led to the eventual collapse that everyone experienced within the Winter Legion Logistics Regiment. And before I can realistically explain that timeline, I need to give everyone a little bit of background knowledge in how the actual regiment was structured, just so that we have absolute clarity in the events that took place afterwards. So WL's membership structure follows this sort of design pattern. So near the top we have the leader, which was Cronus Winter, as well as his immediate officer group. And in collaboration with each other, they formed the managerial positions within the regiment itself. Immediately below this management structure were the lieutenants and team captains, and their job was to make sure that the rest of the regiment was in line with what our goals were and to facilitate day-to-day activities. So despite what a lot of people think, WL's structure was very much Cronus working alongside his officers to figure out what the goal of the regiment is and ultimately making sure that it succeeded. And that typically involved delegating key strategic decision-making positions to the various officers, as well as relaying that information to lieutenants and team captains to ensure that the rest of the regiment functioned normally. So it's very important that you understand the structure, because the main reason for WL's change was going to be how these membership structure were planning to be changed. All right. So again, Cronus, alongside the officers, managed the regiment, as well as the technical side of the regiment, such as running the Discord and the website and various other sort of major tasks within the regiment itself. We had an officer that specialized in diplomacy. We had an officer that was specializing in discussing collaboration with our coalition as well as other coalitions. We had a sigil representative. All of these tasks were shared among the entire leadership structure, and it wasn't just Cronus doing everything. It was a delegation of tasks amongst people that were interested. Again, below that sort of immediate structure, we had people that managed the in-game operations. So this was people building and managing facilities, managing teams within facilities, running operations, etc. So these were our quote-unquote lieutenants and team captains, and they made sure that everything in-game was running smoothly, and of course, if there was any problems, they would communicate that to us or to Cronus, and we solved problems together as a group. And then finally, sort of at the lower echelons of the regiment, we just had people who played the game. So these were people who just wanted to log in, play the game, and they had varying levels of involvement, and that reflected that levels of involvement and trust reflected in the amount of access they had to resources within the regiment itself. Typically, recruits and applicants had the lowest form of resource allowances, and legionnaires and veterans were able to access more things just purely because we trusted them longer, so therefore we expected them to not make outlandish ideas or plans without consulting the management staff of the regiment itself. Right. So again, very important that you understand how the regiment is structured, because this will lead to the ultimate decisions that took place later. The next thing to talk about is WL's relationship within the Foxhole community. Now, this is mostly the colonial side, because WL was primarily a colonial-based regiment. But obviously, there were certain circumstances where we did go warden, but that was very, very, very rare and very seldom, because we had a commitment to helping the colonial side of Foxhole, because we truly believe that the faction itself needs a bit of a hug. And we wanted to make sure that there were at least some vets that kept the faction going. So WL, very much being a veteran logistics regiment, made sure that we had a strong commitment to the colonial faction through the process of public logistics. WL has always been public logistics first. We always made sure that we got as many people and as many new players involved in an organized way to produce Logi for the game, so that people will obviously have weapons and tanks and various other forms of explosions in various shapes available to them at all times. So that was WL's main focus and its main goal. And Cronus very much led the regiment in that direction. Public first, and then we helped out other regiments along the way. However, during my tenure within WL, some interesting developments took place. First and foremost, WL, with Cronus on board, decided to join a coalition. And this coalition was called the Sons of the Legion, or SOL. And this involved various other large regiments that had an inclination for causing destruction, such as NCR, Air, Para, Ember, Bunny, as well as various other regiments that the coalition is slowly getting more and more involved with. Now, WL's place within the regiment was that it would give a secondary commitment to logistics to the coalition after we fulfilled the needs for public. The main reason why we found an interest in playing within SOL was primarily because we saw the effects of coordinated logistical usage within key points during a push, as well as maintaining stability to a particular front. So it's all good and well if we dump a whole bunch of Logi into public stockpiles, but there are certain circumstances where being in communication with other very serious frontline regiments and making sure that they had the correct equipment and tools during a key point within the war would result in a multiplicative advantage during those engagements with the wardens. So to this end, the officers and Cronus decided to engage with a mutual grouping within the Sons of the Legion coalition to ensure that they had the correct tools to do the job, as well as providing public logistics just like we did normally. And during this time, we saw a massive influx in the amount of activity and player involvement within the regiment itself. Maybe one of the critiques of WL at that point in time was public Logi wasn't always that useful, but because we were working with a coalition and we were getting involved with these regiments, our members decided to up the ante and produce way more Logi than needed for just public Logi dumps. And therefore, WL saw a massive influx of more players joining, more stream time for Cronus, overall a massive boom in the amount of logistics that is generally being pushed out to the colonial faction. And it was good. We really enjoyed it. So we saw the development of this relationship with SOL as a positive thing. And we pushed for more engaging commitments to the coalition, and of course, re-establishing our relationships with the public logistics dumps in coordinated means after Sol was satisfied. Additionally, this also allowed us to push more relationships with Sigil. Sigil, for those who do not know, is basically a Discord / group of regiments that focuses on coordinated colonial tasks or operations per se, and Sigil's a way for various regiments to coordinate and collaborate with where and how resources are divvied up between Logi regiments. A lot of regiments decide to go into the Sigil discords to ensure that they can drama-free take certain resource fields so that they can produce their output as necessary. Now, Sigil's constantly evolving, constantly has a shift of additional technologies as well as an increase in involvement. And when WL decided to start playing alongside SOL, we definitely had an inclination to push more relationships with Sigil so that we were on board with the overall organization and structure of colonial veteran regiments to ensure that everyone had a fair opportunity to produce Logi and to coordinate operations with the entire faction as a whole. Previously, we did have a bit of difficulties getting Sigil on board, but again, through the involved discussions and development of the various officers that liaised with Sigil, we started to make good grounds to build up a relationship with the Sigil members, as well as getting more involved with providing resources to them and collaboration. And this was a good thing. And again, we were only able to do this because of the continuing expansion of WL itself within the faction. So now you might be asking, well, why did it collapse? What went wrong? It seemed like things were going really well. Like WL started getting involved with coalition gameplay, was getting involved with Sigil. How did it all unravel? Well, here is where I need to discuss how these structures I just explained managed to not sustain the future of the regiment. So again, before we really get into it, I need to explain a little bit what a hiatus war is. So a hiatus war is basically an internal term that we nonchalantly use within the regiment itself, which basically describes when Cronus decides to take a hiatus from Foxhole. If you ever wondered why Cronus for certain periods of time would not stream the game anymore, it was essentially because he needed a break from the game. So he would announce that he is taking a hiatus, or he was taking a break, or he would simply just not decide to stream anymore. And then that ultimately meant that the regiment itself would expect to go into what we called a hiatus war. It was literally just because Cronus decided to take a break. Now, just to be very clear, we were always, and when I say we, the command staff, was always okay with Cronus taking a hiatus. Foxhole is a very stressful game. It's very stressful to also be a public-facing figure for Foxhole within the streaming community. So we were always on board if Cronus needed to take a break, and he would always step aside completely and let us run the regiment as if he was still in charge, essentially. So during the time that there was a hiatus from Cronus going on, we would always have an interim leader that always commanded WL to keep the structure going. So while Cronus was taking his break, playing some other games, streaming some other games, etc., there would always be an interim leader that was chosen from the pool of current officers. So during these last couple of wars, this was the case. So in War 122, Cronus was very much back at the helm and he was playing full time. Then the war ended quite suddenly and he decided to take a hiatus for War 123 because he basically said that the resource layout for 123 made it impossible to really achieve anything that he was hoping to test out or to try out. And then after War 123, he decided to continue on with his hiatus. So he did not come back in the first couple of weeks for War 124. And during that time, there was an interim leader. He had on multiple occasions stepped up to fill in Cronus' shoes and everyone was very comfortable with his leadership style and the way he was directing the regiment within the spirit of what WL hoped to achieve on a war-to-war basis. It should also be noted that this interim leader was the direct liaison with the Sol coalition as well. So he had a very clear and well understanding relationship with the rest of our immediate coalition, and who was pushing for the goals of WL to follow along with our increased expansion, as well as just collaboration in general. So everyone was cool with it. I don't want anyone to have a negative perception of like, oh, well, Cronus just decides to take a break and the rest of his regiment gets to play. Yeah, and we were perfectly fine with it. And we were very well structured and very well organized to do so. So this was totally fine. And we were totally cool with Cronus taking hiatuses. This was never a negative point for anyone. It was always an opportunity for Cronus to take a break and for us to prove that we can function as a regiment without the very tippy top of the sort of command structure. So let's get to the last war for WL, which was War 124. This was a Hiatus War for Cronus. Cronus did not play in War 124. He only joined after a key event took place that sort of prompted him to get back online and continue playing. But up until that point, Hiatus War for Cronus, normal operation for us to continue operating WL within our usual command structure. The interim leader took up his mantle again. Everything was fine. And 124 was a really successful war for the part of the regiment that played Colonial. The lane that Sol was in was the last lane to collapse before the entire Colonial faction decided to crumple under the oppressive push from the Wardens from the east. And for the most part, Sol did really well. And we regarded 124 a major success for the WL regiment, despite the fact that ultimately the result of the war ended in a loss. However, near the last week before the war ended, all the officers decided to have a meeting to basically plan for the next war. There just comes a certain point in the war where all the front lines are collapsing, all the major concrete bastions are destroyed, and the loss was inevitable. And we called this meeting to basically say, right, we think the war is going to be over in about a week. What do we do for War 125? And again, it's very important to note that at this time, Cronus was still on a hiatus, but he was always invited to join in the meetings, even though he wasn't actively playing the game. It is, of course, his regiment. He should be allowed to come to all his officer meetings. He was the, commanding officer at the time. So we did send him an invite. We always pinged him. We always made sure, hey, Cronus, there's a meeting on, way in advance and on the day, but he decided to not join. As usual, he took his break, and he wasn't going to get involved in the discussion of war plans. And normally he would just agree to the sort of plans that we had in place and how to facilitate them. All right, so War 125 meeting was then going to take place. During that meeting, however, there was a bit of an unfortunate circumstance. So in that pre-war meeting, the interim leader and one of the officers within the group decided to have a disagreement about a proposed direction for WL regarding some nuanced game balance mechanics that honestly isn't that important at this point in time. But essentially, the interim leader had a disagreement with one of the officers, and the meeting got a little bit heated and some non-constructive things were said between both parties. This resulted in the interim leader, after the meeting concluded, to basically announce that he will be leaving the regiment altogether at the start of War 125. So the interim leader essentially decided to step down, but not just step down, but also leave the regiment and go off and play on his own. He did, however, announce that he would stay in his position and keep running the regiment until the war concluded. So it wasn't just a case of he was immediately leaving over a disagreement. He just decided that he no longer wanted to fulfill the position of an interim leader or an officer altogether, and he decided that he no longer wanted to play within WL. And that was his decision, and most of the officers, very disheartened at that decision, decided to accept it, because ultimately he felt like his time wasn't being invested correctly. So we decided that that's perfectly fine, and we would have to make a plan for this. Very important, this decision from the interim leader was basically communicated in an officer level and higher visibility Discord channel. So this means that only the officers got to see this decision that he made, but it also obviously included Cronus. Cronus was able to visibly see this discussion going on, or this announcement going on. So when this interim leader decided that he was stepping down, Cronus decided to wake up from his hiatus and went to go look at the channel, and then he saw that the interim leader was stepping down due to reasons that he explained within his announcement. Because Cronus wasn't directly involved in the meeting, he wasn't there when any of the discussions happened, he didn't quite understand the reasoning behind the interim leader's decision to step down. So he was very, very confused, and he explained that he was very confused and concerned what was going on, even though he wasn't directly involved at that point in time. This confusion and essentially lack of being involved himself, or miscommunication, then resulted in him getting quite angry at the situation. And he was, by his own words, he was very, very infuriated or very angry at the events that was going on, because obviously he, at that point, had a deep respect for the interim leader taking over his shoes, or filling his shoes, let me put it that way, not taking over his shoes, but filling his shoes during those long bouts of him taking a break from the game. And essentially, he then decided, because he was disagreeing with the resulting actions that were taking place, notably the interim leader stepping down and the officers seemingly being okay with it, he decided to carry out his own investigation, started having discussions with people outside of the officer channel, and basically came to a couple of conclusions himself, and he decided that he needed to step back into that primary leadership position that he always had and always maintained, to make some decisions that he felt was the correct path for WL to take going forward. So, because he made his own investigations, he came to his own conclusions, Cronus then decided that after a day of everything settling and everything being sort of discussed a little bit here and there, he decided to make some changes to the regiment. So, effective at the start of War 125, Cronus was removing all the officer positions and all the lieutenant positions from the regiment. And he announced this without doing any public consultation with the rest of the managerial staff, basically the officers or the lieutenants. He basically just came out into the public regiment, all eyes on deck announcement channel, and he just said, this is what the changes of WL is going to take place in. And essentially, the main thing that he wanted to do with these changes was take the responsibility of all decision making within the regiment upon himself. So all management level decisions making was now going to be made by Cronus and him alone. So this includes any in-game disputes would have to be moderated by him. Any problems that there was within the game mechanics itself, or the output, or relationships with other regiments, or, even small things such as someone started to build up a field that we claimed on Sigil and we had a legitimate claim for, the only person that was going to get involved in those form of mediation was going to be him. He was going to be the sole arbiter and the sole mediator within the regiment. And this was the commitment that he now decided to fulfill upon the sort of discussions that happened with the interim leader deciding to step down. So, most importantly, as I said, Cronus did not discuss this plan with any of the officers in any of the public in any of the public officer only Discord channels. He just outright decided after 24 hours, seeing as how the officers caused the interim leader to step down or something along those lines, from his perspective, he was going to make this change and everyone was just going to have to commit to it. So essentially, and I just wanted to visualize this a little bit, this was the new membership structure that Cronus was going to have. So he was going to be the sole management position within the regiment. He did also hint that he might get some Discord moderators or some technical staff involved to, run bots and do all the technical things that he, as a person, could not facilitate. But in terms of the Foxhole gameplay and the management of the regiment, those positions were effectively going to be cancelled. So there will be no other position to help him mediate decision making, and there will be no positions to help enforce the decisions that he was making. Everything was going to go through him. That's how he wanted the WL structure to be. The only remaining positions were going to be the remainder of people who played in the regiment to make sure that day-to-day operations succeeded, so people making logi and running trains and driving trucks, as well as some team captains to facilitate some level of autonomy within these certain groups. So he was essentially going to have people who he could direct to run all the various parts of the regiment, but again, he himself was going to be the only arbiter for decision making and ultimately the resolving of problems within the regiment himself. So captains were just a way for him to delegate the subtasks of the regiment to the rest of the regiment itself. All right, so this was the new command structure that Cronus had decided to enforce himself starting from War 125. So that's the following war. Immediately after this announcement, there were mixed results or mixed feelings about this decision that Cronus had made. I will confirm that the general populace of the regiment was perfectly fine with this decision. So an overwhelming number of members decided that this is fine. If Cronus decides he wants to get rid of the officers and the lieutenants, that's his decision to make. Ultimately, the regiment belonged to him and was bound to his sort of identity. I mean, the regiment was literally named after him. So the non-management members within the regiment generally reacted with positive emojis on the announcement, because members normally can't type out what they think on the announcement room, so they could only react with emojis. And most people were saluting, giving a thumbs up. Generally speaking, people were fine with this decision. However, the officers, now again, also being given this information at the same time as the general populace within the regiment itself, had some immediate concerns with the plan that he had enforced. Notably, 3 major concerns arose among some personal opinions between the various individuals as well. But generally speaking, there was 3 main trends that we were concerned with as a collective. The first one was, how was Cronus going to be able to be available all the time across 3 time zones? WL has a lot of players. We have over 400 members that play on and off, and we have about an active number between 100 to 200, and we've even seen so far as 300 players being involved at any given time. So we had concerns that how were you able to stay awake literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Because that's what the requirement would be if you had to facilitate any facility dramas, any problems with train tracks being placed. One regiment wanted to borrow another part of our regiment, or someone stole something and there needed to be mediation to discuss what the results of, just general Foxhole gameplay stuff happened. How was he going to be able to facilitate this? Additionally, how was Cronus actually going to manage 400 players by himself? That is a monumental task for an individual person to do. So the officers were quite concerned that it was too much of a task for him as an individual person to handle. And then finally, there was a growing concern with what the relationship with WL and Sol and Sigil was going to be going forward as well. Because remember, the reason why WL had an influx of players and an increased amount of production was through the collaboration of the Sol Coalition. Many regiments within Sol started helping WL facilitate a lot of its larger projects. Notably, in War 122, we built a very large facility that functioned fundamentally on regiments bringing resources to our facility in Red River to produce battle tanks, ships, etc. for the war effort. So that required a lot of management between relationships, collaboration, communication across multiple time zones with a lot of different people involved. And we were concerned that we would lose this advantage that we had with WL because Cronus decided that he was going to, quote unquote, do everything and mediate everything by himself. All right, so there were some legitimate concerns from the officers. So because of this, we decided to have another emergency meeting so that we can air our concerns with Cronus himself in voice chat. Because at this point, there was intermittent messages from individual officers saying that they were concerned and they were not sure that this plan would succeed. So Cronus basically just didn't answer any messages that people were voicing. So if an officer basically at Cronus and said, hey, how are you going to manage time zones? Are you going to get more people involved? How is this going to work? He simply didn't reply to people. And there were multiple attempts by all the officers to get messages to him, but Cronus just decided to not reply. His decision, not ours. We tried to communicate as individuals. We tried to communicate as teams. We tried to talk to him and say, hey, what's going on? How is this going to work? We have concerns. And he just decided to essentially ghost us. So because Cronus was not replying, we decided to have an emergency meeting. All the officers got together in a room and we had a meeting where we decided to essentially sort out all the shit. Like figure out what was going to happen, where things were going to go, what our relationship with Sol was going to be. Are we going to stay involved in Sigil? It was quite a pressing meeting to have. And I want to make this very, very clear. Cronus was invited to this meeting. And we pinged him multiple times pre-leading to the time. And we even held the meeting at a very inconvenient time for EU time zone players because we wanted to make sure Cronus was able to join at a comfortable time that he usually would play the game or stream. So we specifically targeted a time zone for him to join in. Ultimately, he decided to ignore our request to have a meeting and he just decided to stay out. However, the interim leader at the point, the guy who said he was going to step down, and the officers all got in the room and we sorted out all our differences, all the disagreements, and we wanted to essentially discuss what we wanted to do considering the fact that Cronus was essentially going to go forth with this plan and get rid of all the managerial staff. So this is what the emergency meeting was scheduled for. During this meeting, as I said, all the officers and the interim leader resolved all our problems. The apologies were made, confusions were cleared out, everyone was back on board and everyone was playing as a team again. Any disillusions with previous discussions were cleared out and we were ready to work as a team again 100%. However, at this point, the goalposts were now shifted. Cronus announced that he was going to change the regiment. We, as individuals, tried to reach out to him to try and explain that we had concerns, but he just outright decided to not listen to us. And this was from all parties involved. I think literally every officer made a point to try and at Cronus to ask him questions, ask him how things were going to work, and he simply did not reply, except I think maybe one or two requests was replied with quote unquote, I don't know, from Cronus. So he either nonchalantly answered, didn't answer at all, or gave a very vague statement, basically alluding to he was not sure how he was going to resolve very specific problems that we had in mind. So during the meeting, all the officers basically committed to the fact that Cronus was going to go through with his plan, and he wasn't interested in discussing it with us. So at that point, we accepted that this was going to be a fact. And every officer, we went around in a circle, and we wanted to make sure that all the officers had an opportunity to decide what they wanted to do going forward. So essentially we just said, now that the officer position was going away, Cronus was going through with his plan, and we wanted to ask what was everyone's thoughts and essentially what they wanted to do going forward. And essentially, the majority of the officers decided that they were going to part ways with WL and continue playing in Sol to some capacity. Now, I also want to mention that this was not a majority decision. There were some officers that were completely okay with Cronus' decision to restructure the regiment as he saw fit, but a large majority of the officers did decide that that was it for WL for them, and they announced during that meeting that they had plans to step down so that they can continue playing in Sol, which up until that point was doing very, very well as a coalition. They wanted to keep that momentum going, and if that meant leaving WL, that was perfectly fine. Okay, so after this emergency meeting, essentially after a day or so, the war came to an end. So the war concluded on Saturday, the 24th of May in 2025, and the next war was scheduled to start on the Monday. So again, just to reiterate, at this point, the officers who had planned to leave WL due to a lack of Cronus's a lack of faith in Cronus's plan, we were not confident that whatever he had, his ideas were set on, was going to work. We decided to group together and make a private Discord so we could continue discussing what we wanted to do within Sol. The reason why we did this was we were very unsure what Cronus would do if we decided to step down from the regiment. We were not sure if we were going to get kicked from the server. We weren't sure if we were going to get banned from the server. So we decided to have a place so that we could continue talking about things while we collaborated with the Sol leadership and ensured that we had a place to go to if WL decided to not be involved with things anymore. And during those discussions, it was also said that Cronus had to be removed from the Sol Discord because on multiple occasions Cronus had given an indication that he was not very, very interested in continuing on with Sol's operations, as he saw the future of WL was going to be beyond just a coalition gameplay. He was thinking that WL was going to be a regiment that produced everything for everyone, not just a coalition. So because of that, we didn't have faith that Cronus was going to upkeep the relationship with Sol. So he was removed from the Discord server by the Sol administration on our request. We were unsure that he was going to maintain that relationship. So that was a decision that was made for absolute clarity. So at this point, we are now in a small, literally cobbled together Discord server, and we decided that we were going to announce our resignation to the rest of the regiment, because again, at this point, the regiment didn't know what was going on except the fact that Cronus was going to restructure the command staff, and we all decided that it would be a better idea that we go and write a personal message to the entire regiment that essentially now goes and says, well, thanks for having us. It was a great time. We had our ups and downs, but we decided to resign. And we coordinated announcing all those messages at the same time. And in a coordinated effort, we posted those messages, and then we essentially left the Discord. I know a couple of officers decided to stay in, but they resigned as an officer, and they also left the regiment. That was the clear intent behind it, because we now were in the process of continuing on to do our own thing. So the leaving officers left the Discord. I think 1 or 2 people members stayed behind, but the clear indicator was we were no longer officers because Cronus was making that decision, and we were no longer WL. We had left the regiment because there was no future that we saw for the regiment itself with the direction that Cronus was taking things. And we tried to voice our concerns. He just decided to ghost us, not listen to us, so we had to move on. And that's ultimately the decision that we had made. So, that's the primary reason why I left WL. I didn't like the direction Cronus was taking things in, and I respectfully disagreed with him. I didn't hold it against him, I didn't see it feasible that he would be able to run and manage 400 people across 3 time zones by himself. He wasn't going to keep up the relationships with Soul and Sigil. He had no intent behind doing it. The only thing that he wanted to do is he wanted to run the regiment the way he saw fit without anyone having the ability to support him. He was getting rid of the positions that were supporting him as a leader and as an individual who had to spend a lot of time making sure that things run smoothly. So, yeah, that was the main thing that we were concerned with, and that's the main thing that I was concerned with. So, ultimately, the decision to leave WL as officers came down to we were not confident that he was going to be able to maintain the organization and growth and the success of WL without an officer or lieutenant position within the regiment. We legitimately were not concerned with the fact that he wanted to get rid of the officers or lieutenants as individual people. It was perfectly fine if he demoted us or kicked us from the server or banned us, whatever he chose. But we were concerned that WL would not function without the officer position. That's the key thing that we want to point out. He didn't want the officer positions and he didn't want the lieutenant positions. That meant no one else could help with decision making. No one would be there for him to deflect ideas off of. He would be the sole arbiter and the sole decision maker of the regiment. And that, as a structure within a large group of people, is unfeasible. There isn't a single company in the world that runs off of one person. There isn't a single army in the world that runs off of a single person. It doesn't work. So we just weren't confident in his plan, and that's why we decided to leave. Right. Because of this decision, there have been a lot of speculation on what WL was like and what the officers was like, and I wanted to just point out that there are some misconceptions, and these are things that I've been reading in Reddit comments. I've had people individual message me. I've seen clips floating around saying, this is the reason why WL left. I just want to point out the things that I've seen already. Now, these might evolve over time, but I want to take some time to clear up any speculation on why the officers left WL. First and foremost, this is not because of any drama with ACA. I know this was a big thing back in War 115. It was a big media thing that occurred at some point last year. But there is absolutely no influences between the ACA drama that occurred literally like 8 wars ago and the decisions that Cronus made this war. At least not any direct connections whatsoever. So we made up with ACA. We actually collaborated a fair amount during the end of that war. That's probably one of the points that people don't want to mention. But ACA did collaborate with us near the end of the war quite well. We made a lot of things for them. They brought a lot of resources to us. At the end of the day, yeah, it was a bit of a grueling event for both parties, but that didn't have any lasting effects to the decisions that took place this last war, and that's legitimately true. So that's the first point. The War 115 drama literally did not influence anything at all. That is just straight up the thing. I don't know how else to confidently inform people otherwise. Second of all, there was a viral clip of Cronus yelling at Venom near the end of War 1-4 when he decided to log on and play a little bit more. Honestly speaking, was a little bit of a jarring reaction to a discussion over Rails, but ultimately that too was not an influence in the resulting decision for officers stepping down. We didn't collaboratively go, oh my god, look how he spoke to Venom, that's it, that's the final straw, we're going to step down. It was nothing like that. In fact, Cronus has had disagreements with various officers in that capacity multiple times before, but at the end of the day, ideas always needed to be communicated. There was always mediation, there was always discussion afterwards, and there was always a resolution to any issues that we had. So again, this wasn't just a once-off, oh, look what happened to Venom during that interaction. It was the decision that Cronus had made to restructure the regiment. That was the concern. Additionally, another idea that was floated around is all the officers stepped down because we were upset that we lost our officer position. Again, not a real factor. The problem was the lack of the officer role in WL going forward. There wasn't going to be anyone to mediate problems. There wasn't going to be anyone to mediate sigil. There wasn't going to be a dedicated person to communicate what our plans were going to be. There wasn't going to be an immediate liaison with Sol. That all of those positions, all of those responsibilities were going to squarely fall on Cronus. And we were not okay with the fact that he thought he could do everything. And we voiced our concerns and he ignored it. That's just it. Fourth point. We did not leave because we felt like we were being abused or used. Speculations, again, out of context clips on Twitch or on Reddit of people saying, oh, look how he yells at his regiment members and blah, 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 blah. That's complete made up nonsense by people who just hate the guy. And I would seriously reconsider sharing those clips everywhere because they are just not true. We were officers for a very, very long time. Most of the officers before us stepped down because of time commitments, not because of individual beef with the guy. It was always a case of clear communication. Sometimes some communications just had to be direct, and sometimes they get a little bit heated. I mean, clearly there was some heated moments between the interim leader and the officer. Things were resolved. There was a little bit of discussion between Cronus and Venom. That was resolved. It's part of the game. It's part of the social interaction. Sometimes the disagreements happen and things get resolved. But at no point did anyone ever decide to leave because we felt like we were being used or abused. There might have been some deeper down ideas behind it, but that wasn't very clearly vocalized to me. So if that was a thing, from my personal perspective, I didn't see it. Again, the main decision making was purely on the basis that we weren't confident in Cronus's plan. And then again, additionally, finally, that basically establishes the point I just made. I doubt there was any individual problems between members that caused us to leave. Again, the interim officer and the officer that had the disagreement are still working together beyond WL right now. So clearly things can be resolved with apologies and moving on and working together. So yeah, there was no additional drama that people have been speculating. It's just not true. The truth is, Cronus made a decision. He was going to restructure things, and we weren't confident in his plan. Period. That's it. That is literally it. And that's the final point I wanted to make with this slide, is there was just a lack of confidence between what Cronus was planning, and we were concerned that his plan didn't have an involvement with Sol and as well as Sigil and the rest of the coalition. Not the coalition, the rest of the colonial faction. He was going in a direction that we didn't have confidence in, and that's why we decided to step down. Okay, so at this point the officers have left. What happened then? So the officers got together and we decided that the best course of action for us and the healthiest course of action for us was to now continue on with a new regiment called High Velocity Logistics. That's kind of like a name that we came up with really, really quickly. We kind of like the idea of High Velocity Logistics. So that's the name that we pinned on, and that's what we were going to call our small group going forward. And that was initially the plan. We were just going to be the former officers and maybe a couple of additional people from groups that we personally played with. For complete clarity, the group I took to play Wardens with in War 124, because remember I took a vacation war, those guys that I played with, I told them because they weren't able to see all the announcements that were happening with Cronus and the rest of the regiment due to how our Discord was structured. So our Discord had a clear separation of roles. If you played Warden and you were verified as Warden, you could not see any colonial rooms, and you could not communicate with any colonials during the war. So whenever there were discussions happening within the quote-unquote colonial-only rooms, they couldn't see it. So to make sure that they were in the loop, I communicated with the Warden group to make, to tell them, hey, this is what's happening behind the scenes. There's, a chance that, the Cronus made this announcement that he is changing the structure, etc. So the result of that is I basically told them I was going to step down. I didn't want to keep you guys in the dark. I'm going to step down as an officer, and I'm going to leave the regiment, and I'm going to continue playing with Sol. And I basically asked them and said, hey, listen, if you want to stay on board, I can send you a Discord invite, but again, we have no plans on growing anything. We just wanted to have a place to continue talking. So my personal squad got invites to join the Discord as well. And I also think a couple of officers who stepped down also invited maybe one or two friends of theirs that was playing in WL as well. It was mostly just friends who joined the regiment who wanted to stay friends and keep playing, kept up that relationship as it goes. Okay. So now we were on a different Discord. At that point, we had announced, we had left, we had no longer any connections within the WL Discord, and we were just focusing on Discord, our new Discord housekeeping. We suddenly had to start incorporating bots. We had to start structuring our rooms. We had to make sure that there was verified channels and integrating things, etc., etc., etc. If anyone has ever set up a Discord server in a very short amount of time, you know how chaotic it is. We were hyper-focused on building up the new Discord so that we could manage our space correctly, as well as meet some of the SecOps security steps that Sol needed for us to be a legitimate Discord as well. Within Sol, you need to make sure that your Discord has a separation of roles so that, if a public member joins, they can't see colonial-only information without being verified. I'm sure people understand this notion. So that's what we were doing. We were setting up this Discord. However, while we were now in the process of setting this up, literally within an hour, suddenly and without warning, Cronus decided to delete the regiment. He, again, just like his previous decision where he decided to announce changes to the regiment structure without any consultation, Cronus just decided to remove everyone. Now, again, to this day, we are not 100% sure if the Discord actually got deleted or people in it got kicked. But from our understanding, the Discord is no more. You can't access it anymore. You can't join it. You can't rejoin it. So we assume that Cronus, who had access to everything, he had full admin rights to everything because he made the regiment and he made the Discord, he just decided to delete everything. And that was his decision, and we are perfectly okay with it. It sucks. It feels bad for all the people that was in the regiment and in the Discord, but ultimately, the officers didn't really care what he did at that point, because at that point, he had already made it clear that he was no longer interested in listening to our concerns, and he was just going to make decisions. So we were accepting for any decisions that he decided to make, and him deleting his Discord and him deleting the regiment was his choice and his choice alone. And he did it, and that's the end of it. And beyond that, that's perfectly fine. Because at that point, we had already accepted that we were moving on and doing our own thing within Sol, and we had our own Discord, and we were moving on. However, this led to a sudden surge of confusion and not understanding, because another thing to keep in mind is Cronus made this decision to delete the Discord in a certain time zone that might not have been applied to the rest of the regiment. So when certain people woke up from, their usual Sunday morning slumber, they suddenly realized that the WL Discord was gone and no communication about it. No one was told anything. The last thing that happened on the Discord server were the officers' resignation messages to the rest of the regiment saying goodbye with their heartfelt, "Thanks for playing with us, we are leaving the regiment." And then the next moment it went dark. So during this time, all the officers got into a meeting in the new HVL Discord, and we decided what we were going to do from there. And we honestly didn't expect Cronus to do this. Legitimately, we did not expect Cronus to suddenly delete everything that he had built up over his entire tenure playing Foxhole. Ultimately, it was his decision. We just didn't expect it. We couldn't predict that someone would suddenly delete his entire Discord and his entire Foxhole presence based on a decision that he wanted to enforce. So now we were stuck in a situation of what do we do? Because we deeply cared for all the members within the WL Discord. Notably, some officers actually gave some concerns with Cronus, saying that, listen, what about the rest of the regiment? How are people going to be able to continue playing together, etc., without you being online 100% of the time? And now that was the case. The Discord was gone. The in-game regiment was gone. Everything was deleted. So we decided that what were we going to do? Because the people that was managing and ensuring the regiment's success, even while Cronus was taking hiatuses, were now in a position of making a new direction for the remaining body of players who were now essentially homeless. So we ultimately decided that we were going to stick to our initial goal for HVL, which was playing with Soul and staying together. Look, at the end of the day, when you play with a certain number of people in managerial level positions, you tend to like them. You tend to agree with how they manage things, play things, organize things, and the amount of effort and passion that goes into these projects. We didn't want to lose that vision. So we decided that we were going to continue on in whatever capacity that we had. So we decided to make an announcement about it on Reddit, just clearly explaining that the officers had stepped down from WL and, suspected that we were going to move on to continue playing with Soul. And then we went through the notion of sending invites to people who basically got kicked/removed from the WL Discord, which ultimately we found out afterwards it was a deletion, not a kicking. So we sent out invites and we said, hey, looks like WL Discord is gone or whatever. Come join our Discord here and come have a chat so that we can figure out what to do. And we decided then and there during that meeting that we were just going to continue. Everything was going to go on as it were. We weren't initially expecting to do that because we had some other plans, joining some other regiments in SOL, but those plans fell away when our family from WL decided that they no longer had it at home with Cronus. So we adjusted our plans very quickly. Again, we had 24 hours to decide what we wanted to do before the next war was starting, and it was a hell of a organizational mess on top of figuring out the structure of this new Discord, the structure of the regiment, and making sure that we were still in line with Sol's plans, etc. Was a lot of effort, and then we stayed up many, many long hours making sure everything was working. And again, props to all the technical staff who came across as well to make sure everything was up and running within 24 hours. It was kind of insane. Okay. And again, finally, I want to make this very clear. We have absolutely no bad will towards Cronus. Again, no misconceptions. Absolute clarity on this. We were perfectly fine with the decisions that Cronus was making as long as we weren't going to be involved with it anymore. Because ultimately, he didn't want us there. He didn't want officers. He didn't want lieutenant. So we no longer had an interest in what his plans were. We had already committed to leaving the regiment. We already resigned, and we were moving on with HVL. And again, there's no lingering bad will with Cronus. We just disagreed with his decision. And this is our official statement within HVL. Ever since everything went down, we have no ill will to the guy. We actually wish him the best. We really do wish he would, come back to streaming and bringing back his usual positivity to the game. We love the guy to bits. We just didn't like his decision. And we voiced our concerns multiple times. He decided to ignore us, and we moved on. That's it. That's literally it. And yeah, not being able to communicate, I guess, or not being able to resolve a problem that we had an issue with, I guess that's one of the main factors that ultimately led to us leaving the regiment, which then prompted additional decisions from Cronus, which we can't justify because we don't know. Yeah, that's basically it. We all really hope that Cronus is doing well. I personally have tried to contact him. He either has me blocked, or he has us muted, or just general DMs are closed. I haven't been able to reach out to him ever since I sent my farewell message in the WL Discord, which obviously then got deleted. And now that the dust has settled, honestly, the only things that I have left about WL were fond memories. It really felt like a Foxhole family. Like we had some great times. We had a lot of ups and we had a lot of downs. I'm sure everyone who plays Foxhole can agree that there are ups and downs when you play this game. But the overwhelming amount of ups that we had heavily outweighed the downs. Like, I can easily go on about how I enjoyed 20 wars and disliked one war because of probably external factors. Nothing within WL that caused it anyway. And from my side personally, if WL ever comes back, if Cronus decides to boot it back up and start over, I'd be more than happy to work alongside with him and whatever members he brings to the party. Genuinely, sincerely. Like, I really am sorry that WL closed down. Ultimately, it was his decision, and I respect him for making that decision, but I couldn't go on with his plan. I couldn't go forward with it. For me personally, I can't commit to this illogical idea of controlling 400 people over 3 time zones, and while maintaining all the relationships with Soul and Sigil. I don't think he would have been able to do it. And that's essentially why I decided to leave. And there was a mutual concern shared by all the officers, or the majority of the officers, and that's why HVL is now a thing. Yeah. It's a tough decision to make. It was a tough discussion to be had, but it had to be made. It wasn't going to work. Sincerely, at the bottom of my heart, it wasn't going to work. Not with Airborne right around the corner. With us having the plan to make lots of airplanes and bombers for the Soul Coalition, because we truly believe that aircraft is going to be a real pain in the ass to build. It wasn't going to be done by single regiments. Airborne is going to be about coalitions. I feel it in my bones. And if it's not going to be a coalition, it's going to be like a coalition of coalitions. You're not going to be making bombers like Spathas. You're not going to be making bombers like destroyers. It's going to be multidisciplinary involvement. And Cronus deciding that he was the person who's going to make all the decisions. He was going to manage all the people. He was going to be an omnipresent within the Foxhole. I didn't see it happening. And that's why I left. So, that's the end. Legitimately, very saddening. I really miss my WL tag, but it wasn't going to work. And we just reached this impasse that no matter what we did, and no matter what we said, Curtis just didn't want to listen to us. And if I could turn back the clock now and change a few things, I would. But ultimately, we are where we are now, and we're looking forward, and we're keeping on. So, that's it from me. Again, bit of a difficult video for this one, but hopefully that clears things up. Please, I beg of you, try not to make up random shit. Like, legitimately, the ACA stuff didn't affect any decisions. A singular outburst from Cronus over literal thousands of hours of playing the guys was not enough to push us to like leave. It was legitimately a fact that he felt that he could manage the entire regiment by himself, and we disagreed, and that's it. And we moved on from there. That's it. That's the end of the story. All right. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them on YouTube. I will diligently try and answer them honestly. But again, I'm not doing this to stir drama. I just wanted to get all the information out there, and now the discussion was made. Okay, that's it from me. Look forward to more update videos about Foxhole. I love this game. I'm going to keep playing it, and hopefully have some cool content in future works. All right, that's it from me. Take care.